Hello and welcome to the Looking for Growth podcast with me, Rebecca Ray, and James Newport, co-founder of LFG. We are joined today by Joe Hill, who's Policy Director at Restate, and Julia Willemyns, who's co-founder of the Centre for British Progress. Joe, would you mind giving us a bit of an intro to yourself and what you do?
Sure. Restate's a cross-party think tank. We're based in Westminster, and we work on public service reform. Before here, I worked for an AI company for a bit, and I was a civil servant for 7 years.
In what department, Joe?
In the Home Office and then in the Treasury with you, James.
Treasury. Oh, yeah. Had to drop that in there. Fair.
And Julia?
So Centre for British Progress is a new think tank. I'm one of the co-founders. It was launched this April. And we are focused on economic growth and science and tech progress. Ultimately, we care about human progress, and we think that growth and material abundance is how you get that. Before that, I actually came from the private sector, so I worked in tech and also then in like a philanthropy/family office.
Can I just very quickly ask? You came from a private sector in tech, and then you've now created a UK think tank. What led you to doing that? That's quite a different shift.
It was in some ways a complete accident, a very happy accident. But I was going to go to law school in America, and I wanted a project to run over summer because I wasn't really loving my last job. So I started with David, my co-founder, a campaign based on science and tech policy. So basically crowdsourcing ideas from scientists and technologists. And the model was a program that was set up by the Federation of American Scientists in the US. We saw this worked really well for them. And I thought this could be a really fun thing to do for a couple of months before I went off to law school. And here I am now, having started a think tank. And very, very happy to be here and not in tons and tons of debt. And actually feeling like I'm making a difference instead of reviewing boring American constitutional law.
Well, it's I think American constitutional law is maybe being tested right now. So it's very exciting to come over. It's just an interesting shift. I know a lot of people who have gone from think tanks or government into tech. A bit like you, Joe, right? You went straight from the Treasury into the AI company. But yeah, the other way around is less common, at least for myself. So it's interesting to hear. But yeah, thanks so much for joining us both today. We're going to talk through a few topics, which should be quite nice and spicy. Decline of the UK. Does it exist? Do you think it exists? If it does exist, what role do think tanks such as yourselves have to play in that? Causing it, ending it? We're going to take both routes. And then moving from there into, okay, what's the future look like? What's the opportunities? What kind of things should we be thinking about in terms of AI, in terms of public sector reform? How hard should we go on the civil service reform agenda? That's a big thing, big talking point. And then also spend, tax, budget, just over a month's time. What kind of things should we see in that? Where does the government need to go further? If it does, is everything just kind of hunky-dory? And then if we have time, we'll try and put you in the hot seat of trying to pretend like you're the PM and you have 6 months to save the country. So what would you want to see? So I'll dive straight into the first of the kind of deep questions, which is, Julia, do you believe the UK is in decline?
I guess it doesn't matter so much what I believe. It matters what people in the UK believe. And British people definitely do feel like they are in decline. There was some interesting polling looking across every single sector of public life. How do people feel things are going? Are they improving or are they getting worse? And across pretty much everything from crime to the NHS to the economy, it's all, people have a sense that in all these areas things are getting worse. And that maps on pretty clearly to the economic situation. So we haven't grown since 2008, really. Our productivity growth is pretty much flatlining. This is all very well-trodden territory for looking for growth people. But I don't think people understand how dramatic this has been when it comes to the living standards of ordinary households. If we were tomorrow 25% poorer, everyone would be complaining quite a lot. But no one really thinks about the opportunity cost of what would it be like to be 25% richer. So if Britain's in decline, I also think, like, we've been here before. 1970s, pretty tough. 3-day work week, everything, bins all around London, the streets literally stank, unemployment really high, and yet then we were able to pick ourselves back up. I don't think it is a permanent decline. I still am very optimistic, but it would be disingenuous to not recognize how difficult of a situation we are in right now.
Excellent. Joe, same question. Do you feel the same?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we can turn it around, right? I think that there are lots of different ways you can kind of feel we're in decline. You know, over the course of your life, you can look around. I started working about a decade ago. In that time, it's very clear, like, the pressure on, you know, your paycheck's way higher than it used to be. You really feel the change in cost, the availability of public services, things like that have just materially got better in ways that people can see. And yeah, Julia's right, like, people aren't stupid. You can tell them that GDP per capita is like 0.1% higher, and they'll think, so what? Everything else has gone wrong. But there are other ways, like, you know, internationally. I'm probably not the only one here who knows people who are British and who, you know, grew up here and have lived their lives here, but have decided actually this is too much. They want to go live somewhere else, and they have better opportunities. And you know what? Talented people are very mobile. I think that's really challenging. The West broadly is experiencing lots of similar problems to us, but there are bits which are doing better and bits which are doing worse. I think, like, so I'm going to become a father for the first time in March, which I think is very, like, clarifying on lots of these things. And, you know, I don't know about you guys. I certainly feel that our generation is staring down the barrel of, like, a worse off quality of life probably than a lot of our parents' generation had. Certainly worse off in terms of opportunity and aspiration. You know, the trajectory that lots of people were able to have over their lives of the previous generation, it doesn't seem like it was there for most people in our generation. And I think when you're expecting to have children, or you have kids yourself, that's very clarifying, right? You think that this isn't kind of a game. This is deadly serious.
Yeah, it's like almost an obvious question, right? It's a bit of a leading question because, you know, LFG, obviously, that's kind of key message when you set up around the idea that UK's in decline. We need to reverse that. But one, it's good, I think, to, like, sense check that with people like yourselves and often people who work in think tanks. Right, there's often an element where you guys try and be, not necessarily you, but you as an ecosystem, try to cut through potentially the kind of a vibe of the country and actually look at the raw evidence and argue from that position. And one of the pushbacks we get, for instance, online is like, oh, actually, you know, crime is going down, you know, violent crime down, etc. Yes, phone thefts are up and bike thefts. But, you know, this is everyone talking about how bad the UK is in decline is not being true. We are, you know, we're getting a little bit of growth. I think we've got like 0.1%. You know, it's technically not, you know, fat. It's a little bit. So it's good to, like, sense check from you guys of, like, actually, and I think what you said at the start, which is doesn't necessarily matter what I think, but what the sense of the mood in the country is that generally everyone feels like, or, you know, a significant majority of people feel that's where we are. And I guess where would you guys point the blame for that? Like, who's dropped the ball? How many people have dropped the ball? You know, obviously we've had big events, COVID, you know, the turbulence of Brexit and sorting that out. But yeah, is it all politicians? Has the whole kind of public service sector kind of got a little bit to reflect on?
Sure. Yeah. God, so many people, right? I think
You go for everyone.
we don't, not everyone, but we don't have all day.
You don't want to list all the names.
No, I think, you know, that one day the truth will out and people will be counted. But you know, so many people, and you know, it's so easy to point the finger at our politicians and our political class. But you know what? A lot of people talk about the kind of challenges we have getting talent into politics, and actually, for better or worse, the people we have are the ones who stood up to be counted, and the other people I point the blame at all the people who just stood by and did nothing. I think people like us do deserve a lot of blame, genuinely. Not me personally or Julia, but I do think I had this kind of clarifying experience. We were both at Labour Party conference a couple of weeks ago at the time of recording, and I was at this sort of private discussion about AI and how AI is going to change. And maybe we'll get onto that a bit later. But I just had this moment looking around the table of thinking, God, a lot of these people were here talking about this same topic 10 years ago. And if you asked them all what they thought would happen, they would say AI would never get to where it is today. It would never be able to do the things it is today. They paint a very different picture of the past. And now, today, they always thought it would do what it would do today. They've completely changed their tune. And the policy-making class does have a lot to answer for. The sort of professional commentator, thinker. We're very unaccountable for a lot of the things we suggest people do and the kind of very vibes-based ways that the sector decides what it thinks. It's incredibly mimetic. It's just as groupthinky as Westminster and Whitehall are. I think we deserve a bit of blame too. And I found myself really frustrated at this conversation saying, hang on, you guys all thought a bunch of different things 10 years ago and some of your talking points are still the same. Like, if you were wrong about the big stuff, what else are you wrong about?
So how do you think the ecosystem as a whole should reform or could reform to change?
I mean, I think...
I didn't want to
put
what that change is.
No, I mean, it's great. It's great that new organisations and more people are getting into it. And, Julia's team are doing a great job, and maybe they'll talk a bit more about that. It's a small world, right? Think tanking in Westminster is very different to think tanking in DC. Duncan Robinson at The Economist wrote something in a recent column about the Resolution Foundation saying, some think tanks in Britain are very well funded, but most think tanks are like 3 recent university grads in a trench coat or something like that. And he's not wrong, right? I mean, we're 9 people and not all recent graduates, but it's a really small world and a bigger world, more diversity in that world, more points of view and more debate and discussion is key because at the moment it is not that competitive. Like not a lot of people are trying. And we lack ideas, right?
Yeah, I agree. I kind of the moment I think about a lot is not the 1970s when Parliament, I think, started dying. So Parliament actually used to make decisions. MPs, their jobs are to represent not just their constituents, but to represent their parties, to think about governing, to hold government to account. And then that's not what's happening today.
Sorry, why the 70s? What was the turning point then?
That's when caseload for MPs increases
a
ton. And that's partially because the welfare system becomes more complex. I mean, it was creeping, but the 1970s is you really see that explosion.
Yeah.
And then their actual structure internally to deal with those increasing demands doesn't shift. Local government also gets slightly hollowed out, so you don't end up having social workers doing that work locally. So MPs are now focused pretty much on being a customer service desk for their local communities. And they don't have the policy expertise, either individually or in their teams, to deal with the complexity of legislation. Legislation is legally complex. We're dealing with policy issues that people study for years and years to understand. So you start seeing Parliament being hollowed out in terms of capabilities because those MPs' offices are not focused on governing. And then all of a sudden, the bills that are going through Parliament are pretty much just signing the check to departments to do whatever they want. Through statutory instruments and frameworks. This means that being an MP is actually not that exciting, right? Pay's not amazing, it's good, but it's also really hard to be an MP. You're getting tons of abuse, you're working crazy hours, so the pay is not commensurate with the workload. At the same time, you're completely disempowered. All you can do is hope for a ministerial role, because if you're a backbencher MP, you're a glorified social worker. So maybe not people going into politics, quality goes down slightly. This is also the party's fault. You should be choosing people not just based off of loyalty and political views. But, I think they should know what inflation means or what a bond market is. Maybe we shouldn't have leaders of political parties that believe you can use hypnotherapy to enlarge people's breasts. So that's also the party's problem for not actually looking at these people as high-skilled workers and doing the proper meritocratic system to get them in. But it's because the job is also kind of crap. So if you have crap MPs, then your select committees are a bit crap as well. Those select committees also don't have the policy advice and expertise outside of the civil service to really do the work that they're supposed to be doing. And then you think, okay, but if I become a minister, the really good MPs that become ministers and make actual decisions, they'll have more power, and maybe you believe it's like a normal distribution in terms of talent, and the best of the MPs are the ones who will end up making the decisions, and actually that's a good thing. Maybe, sure. But then they become ministers. Again, they have tiny teams. We have the smallest number of political advisors in all of the G7 countries, like smaller than Canada and Australia. So you go in, you have maybe, let's say, like 6-7 people. You have like a diary manager. You've got 2 people working with you as private secretaries, and then a couple of policy advisors, and most of them are like political liaisons or comms people, not actually subject matter experts. Obviously, the political element of decision making is going to be completely hollowed out, and you'll have to end up relying on the civil service. So, I think a lot of the problems that you see today comes from a lack of political accountability, because the politicians don't know what they're really doing, and it's not their fault. I'm not saying it's not like one individual's fault. It's because they don't have the capacity and the to know what they're doing.
I'm not too sure on the history of think tanks, but I can't remember much about kind of when I've looked at political history, seeing much about think tanks before the 1970s. Do you think there's been a rise then in think tanks because of that lack of expertise with the MPs?
Yeah, I think so. So I think think tanks have a very different role to play in the UK compared to the US. So in the UK, I think they're kind of external advisors for governments when they want to like get a second opinion on what civil servants are doing, and give more capacity from the outside to that political, like very, very thin political layer. Whereas in the US, you get a little bit of that, but what you get more of is whole teams of think tankers going into government to fill that thick political advisor layer. And then as soon as their party goes out of power, they leave and they spend 4 years, 8 years doing the policy thinking, such that when they go back in, that's directly what informs that political thick layer. So this is a huge generalization, but where in the US it's like maybe part of that cycle in and out, in the UK there aren't enough seats to take in all the think tankers, and in any case, you kind of need the people on the outside that you can tap on the shoulder and ask advice to. But that's not going to work as well, because people on the outside, like, we do our best, but we don't know what's going on day in, day out in the government, even if a lot of us, I don't have government experience, Joe did, but I'm sure that things change quite quickly and you don't have that context.
Yeah, this is... I find the US distinction of the UK one really interesting, of how think tanks are integrated in, and you do really have a far better system, what feels a far better system of engagement between those units and actual government and how it operates. And the thin political layer in our system is absolutely ridiculous. And it frustrates me, right? Because a bunch of stuff you're talking about there is fixable by the government. You can just hire more political advisors. You could just do that if you weren't just worried about some Daily Mail article coming out at you and telling you, oh, you're hiring those bads. Literally, the person on the street doesn't care how many political advisors you have. What they care about is, are you delivering and making things better for them? And if you do that with 1,000 more special advisors, great. That's what people want to care about. But it seems really difficult for politicians to push that forward. And maybe I'm an outlier in thinking that, but I would be absolutely happy if that was the case, that they hired more political advisors. Because what you're talking about, I didn't actually know about a caseload issue of like the change in the MP's
Sure, but I
role.
mean, that would be a more difficult change. It would mean getting MPs to do less caseload work, and I think politically that could be more difficult to sell.
You could up their teams though, right? You could, and you could also pay their teams better, but separately.
All of this costs money though, and who's paying for that?
Yeah. Yeah, we should come on to that. That's a very good point. Yeah. But it feels like structurally, if you want better decisions, if you're going to up workload, you need good, competent people in there, and you're probably going to need to hire and pay more. But you're taking on, like, so that's the ecosystem we have right now. How come you, Julia, decided that was the one you wanted to lean into? You wanted to start the Centre for British Progress. Where's the gap that you saw?
Every entrepreneurial pursuit starts with incredible naivety. Why is no one doing this? There's a reason why. No, I mean, I think ultimately I really care about this country. I want to live here. I want to raise my children here. I also care a lot about impact and having an impactful career. And I think you can't shut your eyes off to politics. It's incredibly frustrating. It's a very depressing sector to be in because the incentives aren't super clear, right? So when you're in business, you kind of know what you're optimizing for, and everyone else knows what they're optimizing for, and to some extent, you kind of know what the answer is. You might not get there, but at least you know what you're going towards. Whereas in politics, it's slightly more opaque, and that's an incredibly frustrating ecosystem to be in because you're failing all the time, and you have all these irrational actors, and you're like, gosh, like, why are you doing what you do? But it is the best way to actually have a large-scale impact on the country and through second-order effects on the world. So if you're trying to optimize for having an impactful career, and one that feels really fulfilling, where you actually feel like you're giving back. I mean, I think it is probably the best sector to work in, and I urge people to get more involved because I don't think that there is enough, really talented people from very different backgrounds working in politics and in policy.
And Joe, you were from the other side, right? You're in Treasury, and you saw you engaged with think tanks, and like what made you want to go into that?
So side? I don't need to give you the life story, but I kind of got here a complicated route. I left the civil service just sort of a little bit frustrated and fed up, and maybe a little bit kind of done with working in policy and Westminster. There were push and pull factors, but the kind of apolitical, keep your opinions to yourself, very hierarchical civil service that I loved in lots of ways just got a bit tricky for me, and I couldn't quite colour inside the lines anymore. At the same time, I'd kind of, in some of the jobs I'd done in government, started to get very excited about AI, and this is all pre-ChatGPT, so people thought I was kind of fanciful and insane, and were like, "Oh, what's all that about then? Is that like chatbots? Is that going to amount to anything?" And I thought that might be fun and an interesting thing to do, and that was right, absolutely. And there's a model where I'm still working at an AI company, a sort of alternative future. I ended up coming back to Westminster because I thought I got a very cool offer, and like it'd be quite tricky to pass it up, and I can talk about why more. But also because country was in a rubbish place. Like between the time I left the Treasury and joining a think tank, we had the kind of disastrous mini budget and interest rate rises, and illegal migration continued to get off the charts. Public service quality continued to decline. It was kind of obvious we were in for significant political change, and I thought, I'm still just about young enough that I can afford to take a bit of a pay cut and go and do something fun for a little bit. And I think, like, just to echo it, this isn't a careers podcast, I don't think, but like think tanks are really fun. Like putting aside the impact and political and kind of saving the world motivations, which you can satisfy in lots of other jobs. it is a great thing to do. It's not for everyone. I recently wrote a like blog post about why you shouldn't work at a think tank, because we are selfishly hiring at the moment, and I thought I'd be able to kind of get it to go a bit viral by telling people the bad reasons to work there. But I work for a really small organization, smallest one I've ever worked in. We don't have loads and loads of meetings. I get to write a lot. I get to read a lot. I get to talk to interesting people, like do podcasts like this. And I get to say what I think. And, I was in the civil service for 7 years. You don't say what you think. And, the price of being able to just write and send off a tweet about whatever random opinion kind of comes into my head, or write a blog or write a paper about it, that's a price worth paying sometimes.
The kind of traditional format, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, of think tanks is kind of policy report writing, talking to MPs, talking to people in government, talking to civil service about that. Do you think there's anything that is changing in the think tank world about the way that you do that? Because LFG, although we're not a think tank, we have a more kind of guerrilla style. I haven't checked that with Lawrence, actually. Maybe I shouldn't say guerrilla style, but way of kind of promoting policies that we're a fan of, or highlighting things that we are not happy with. I was wondering if that kind of you are looking at think tanks, and is there any changes going on there?
Yeah, so I think one thing that we do that's slightly different is we work on a commissioning model mostly. What does that mean? It means that we talk to people in government or in different political parties, and we try to figure out, what do you actually want? What is the policy demand? And then we try to fulfill that. Lots of people think about think tanks as actually quite literally a tank where you can sit and think, or you
ruined my romantic vision now.
You live in this vacuum, and you have brilliant ideas, and you write this brilliant report, and all of a sudden the state is fixed. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes we do have passion projects, and some of them actually have been quite impactful. For example, one of my passion projects was this exceptional talent office idea, where it was all about getting some of the best most talented people into the UK, and actually having something like a headhunting unit for the country. And I kind of thought this was not going to happen at all. It was one of my pet projects, and then that's something that's actually, well, we'll see if it's implemented well, but at least government said that they want to do more of this kind of work. So sometimes you have a good idea, or I don't know if it's good, but you have an idea and it's taken up. But most of the time you need to have those demand signals to figure out what people in government actually want. We've also tried to experiment a little bit more with tools. So we're hosting this planning tool called Scout. We've done sort of R&D grant-giving toolkits. So more interactive things that civil servants can use from the inside to help them in their policy making. And we've got a couple other projects that we're working on as well. But at the end of the day, I think it kind of will depend on where in the ecosystem you sit as a think tank. There are many, many different things you can do to pressure government to have different kinds of policies. And I think actually what LFG does is incredibly impactful. And whether or not, even if you're not a think tank, you can have so much influence when it comes to the kinds of policies that government picks up. And I think we should all be thinking a little bit more creatively about the methods. I
agree. I think times change, we change with them. That there's all sorts of things that think tanks do now they didn't do 10 years ago, and we all do things very differently. I think the sector broadly is experimenting with much more short form ways of communicating things, much more blog and article style work. Probably as kind of attention spans decline, we need to kind of decline reduce what we do to fit those slightly. But I do want to plug for I think ain't broke, don't fix it sometimes. And why do I think that? I think we're in the ideas business, and actually ideas really matter. Good, new, original, well thought through, challenging ideas really matter. And they're in way shorter supply than people think. It's sort of sometimes like fashionable in Westminster and everywhere else to say, we've got enough ideas. What really matters is kind of execution or something along those lines. That's a kind of, and sometimes people even borrow from startup world where they say, all startup ideas are kind of equally good. All that matters is 90% execution or something like that. And
well, I guess you need like policy ideas to be able to do the execution.
Well, absolutely, yes. You've taken the words right out of my mouth. I think it's like no. I think it's like that's maybe true. Like maybe we say it's 98% execution, 10% ideas, but way fewer than 10% of people are working on the ideas. Like the ideas are really underpriced. Like genuinely good ideas are so hard to come by, and particularly new ideas. The thing I'd throw back at some of those people from tech culture in particular, particularly from kind of venture capital. Peter Thiel talks about it.
Just be careful, Joe. Here, this is we've got a lot of tech people.
It's like the idea that like heresy is really important, right? That saying often quite controversial things is really important for progress and for making. For finding between the kind of consensus and the radical different idea, finding some kind of new balance of what the right thing to do is. And I would say even the think tank sector is incredibly kind of groupthink driven, is incredibly cautious about saying what it really thinks about things. And a lot of it is really in the kind of content business rather than the ideas business, like just trotting out like groups of words which say the same thing. I call these things like policy memes a lot, and I've written about it before. Like there are these things which you say in Westminster and everyone kind of, they're sitting around the podcast or they're sitting around the table in Parliament, they nod a lot. And, James, you say, we need to be more preventative in health policy, and we all nod. And the real importance of you saying that is not that it advances the debate, because most people think that. It's that we all know now that James is he's one of us. He knows how to do the memes. And, you say prevention, early intervention. I say targeting is going to be key. And you nod and you know that I'm one of you guys. And I think a lot of the ideas in Westminster kind of come from this world, right, of just ill thought through, ill conceived kind of, they're mimetic in some way, right? Your people are saying them just for the sake of saying them. So that's the bit of the think tank culture I think we need to keep, and we need to resist the slide into a kind of like sometimes client journalism. I think it depends. Like I think different think tanks have different models. There are kind of more insider focused ones, and certainly the party political ones, right, will always be a bit more kind of in their in-group and working with the political parties that they support. That's inevitable.
There's communications element to that as well.
Sure.
And you're trying to get the party in. It's not just
totally. For those of us that are more cross-party, like I think we have more of an opportunity to kind of speak our mind. Equally, I don't think that necessarily means the quality's higher in many of them.
You've kind of set me up for two follow-on questions. One to go into our next stuff. We want to talk about public services for future, and I really want to get into that. But also, you've touched on a really key topic, which I felt very much when I was at the Labour conference and events around that, which was this issue of like, you're talking about ideas and the importance of ideas, and the place you'd hope a lot of those ideas are being discussed with party conference. The vast majority of my party conference experience was about, do you think the PM will still be in a job in a year? Do you think Rachel Reeves will survive after the budget? Do you think X, Y, and Z? Oh, Andy Burnham, look at his failed coup attempt. Like this is what people like talking about and liked, and then we had discussions which were meant to be policy focused, were ones where people were using exactly the kind of terminology used. Oh, we need to make sure this scheme does X, and oh yes, we need to make sure it does this. Yes, and everyone nods, and then I throw a spicy comment in, and everyone gets a little bit irate because they're like, James isn't playing by the rules here. And they say afterwards, James, you're a bit punchy, you got to be careful. But it's like, this should be a delivery point, and instead it just feels like everyone's coming around for a nice little gossip. But please, like, you're the guys that run events there, right? You're the guys that are there to lobby and to push the ideas. Is your experience better than mine?
I mean, I don't think party conference is about policy formation. I think it's this like instance where, you all go around the table and you hold hands and you think we are a group and we're here to solve a problem. Let's not think about what the problem is. It's a problem. It's all about like I guess, creating in-group and out-group dynamics. And like maybe that's fine to some degree. Like to be able to identify your people and to do this like strange ritualistic dance. You do have useful side conversations at conference. I don't think the roundtables in conference are where you're going to get policy made, but I kind of think that's okay. Like that's not what it's trying to do. I still find it incredibly useful to catch up with people individually and to meet new people, and then you'll do the serious policy thinking afterwards. But you know, when you're in the TikTok reception watching Emily Thornberry do her fantastic DJing, I'm not thinking, oh, you know, I'll go up to her after this and talk to her about welfare reform.
Same for you, Joe.
Yeah,
I know you were busy over conference period.
I can't advance much on that. I think you're right. I think that like in another question, you might be asking us about talent in politics, right? And we'd be saying, well, the parties need to be much sharper about working out who their leaders should be and how they select those people. In a sense, gossip, right, plays an important part in that. Like, I do really believe that who leads these organizations matters. I believe how they select the future people in that matters. Do I think that, like, you know, a drunken conversation at the Spectator reception is going to change that? Like, probably not. But it feels fine to me that political parties spend a lot of time on that. I think you can get, there's fault on both sides. Like, you can get a bit of a good policy-making discussion going at party conferences with the people who are interested in that. And I'd encourage you all to come along to our events next year. But for sure, it's a party political environment, right? It's going to have a different tone to Westminster.
Very fair. Okay, I won't probe further on that because there's lots we could discuss, and some of it will just be my own angst and anger at traveling so far for that. But anyway, let's go into building public service of the future. You guys are obviously in the business of these ideas, pushing what a public service should be. Becca, do you want to take us away on the kind of first strand of that?
Yeah, so how radical do you think civil service reform needs to be? Start it off quite open, but...
Sure. Yeah, I think I draw some distinctions here between, and maybe these are academic, between like civil service reform, wider public service reform, and then like the shape and size of the state, right? And we might think different about all of those things. Civil service reform kind of used to be this very nerdy, techie concept not many people were interested in, and is now only like a slightly less nerdy and techie concept that some of us are interested in. But it's my day job, and I spend a huge amount of time on it. And I think it's an area we need to be really, really radical, because you can look at the history of failed attempts of civil service reform in Great Britain and read reports by think tanks, civil servants, ministers, independent commissioners, which say exactly the same things as we still say today, and they stretch back decades and centuries, right? And there is clearly a kind of profound state capacity issue. And in a very over-centralized country like Britain is, where our governance is so focused on like a small number of people in SW1A, it really matters how good those people are and where they come from and what they do. And we have big problems there, which we basically haven't solved. You know, the civil service today is a relic of decades of trying to reform it and failing. And I think that means you should take wherever your sort of starting point is for what the right answer is, and then try and be, I don't know, like 20% more radical than that, because ambition always gets watered down, changes always get watered down, and you need to take a really kind of punchy approach to doing it. Have you got any interesting like favorite, or I guess least favorite attempts of civil service reform? It's hard to say, because like, so have any of these ever really been a success or failure? It's very hard to judge. I think not. I've got loads of favorite and not favorite ideas, but in practice, like, these organizations look like basically like they did decades ago. And that's a real failure, right? The world's moved on, things have changed. Not everything needs to change, but God, these ones do. So like, you can pick any of your favorite reports, but in some sense, until recently, eminent think tanks based in Westminster started writing about it. Of course, those are the best ones. no one's really managed to crack the nut.
And what about like the wider public service? I know you touched on the three kind of tenets, but wider public service. I know you've talked before, Julia, about like examples of regulations which fail to allow new industries to start. So like, how do you see, and we'll go into AI in a little bit, but just like existing systems of the public service, whether it's from regulations and bodies that have been set up, how do you see that these things need to reform? Do you think they need like substantial change, or is it just like more of an evolution?
Yeah. So I like to think that in the problem often isn't the individual. Sometimes it is the individual, right? Sometimes some people are like really should be are the problem. They are the blocker. But often it's the incentives within the system and the system itself. And I think this is. I was talking to someone the other day about state capacity and civil service reform. I'm not going to use any names, but he was telling me about one particular civil servant who was incredibly entrepreneurial in one job, was able to kind of reform the entire department, change tons of the people within the department, cut lots, and then moved into another position where the incentives were slightly different. Huge blocker, not getting anything done, stasis, entropy. Same exact person, no personality change, but the incentives were different. And I think you can...
Do you know what those incentives were?
Oh, I mean, just like promotion would be based off of this, performance reviews would be based off of this, and then incentives slightly changed. And I'm sure Joe has very particular ideas on like the HR side of things when it comes to how civil servants are promoted and incentivized internally. But I think you can then take a step back and have that same analysis when it comes to institutions. So for everyone from a regulator to a department will have its own set of incentives. The regulator's incentive, for example, is to make things as safe as possible. That's their job. But currently we don't have any built-in incentive structure for how fast can you get a clinical trial review through, for example, or how many nuclear power plants have been built. And like that's not built into the incentive structure of those bodies. And similarly, for example, the department, DESNES, their entire job is on climate and energy. No trade-offs at all. They don't have to think about trade-offs. It's not their job to think about trade-offs. So when they see people saying we're actually going to increase demand incredibly high by adding all these AI data centers, like obviously they're going to say, actually no, because we have a different set of aims. So yeah, I mean, I do think that when it comes to both how individuals work within the civil servants, how regulators work within a system, and then how departments work together, I like to think a little bit more about how the incentives are set up and less about who's in there. I mean, that's why I think that...
But do you not think that if you change the incentives in a lot of cases, that would be, to civil servants, quite radical reform, if that makes sense?
Yeah, maybe. But I'm not anti-radical reform. Okay. But I think radical reform needs to be adding capacity. I think the failure of Doge, for example, or the failure of the slash and burn model where you're not building the right kind of capacity to then fill it, is you don't fix the problem, you create new problems and you create holes, and you realize that it wasn't because of the people that were in it, it was because of the structure of the system.
Yeah. No, I very much agree with that. Like I often... it's these like blunt approaches of X. We're just going to cut X number of civil servants, and I think like that is failing to miss the point of like you actually need to discuss like what you want from a civil service, what you want it to achieve, and how you're going to incentivize it to deliver that, and then work out well, how many people do we need, and what can we do, and how can we streamline. Because I've worked with fantastic civil servants. I mean, Joe was one of them at the time of Treasury, but there's a bunch of civil servants who I think are great. Some who I think probably should be moved on, but they are the victim of your own kind of structure you're set into, and sometimes there are teams that are hyper effective, not necessarily for the right reasons, but they're very, very effective because they were driven to deliver something in that area. And like this comes back to your point as well. Your Desnes example was great, right? Because it picks up on your big kind of piece of, was it this year or last year? It was on
everythingism.
Everythingism.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And like that is a real structural problem, right? Like
Yeah.
That's, you should, if you have a department which is actually at war with itself.
Yeah.
Like,
I think it's like, there's so much in there to unpack. And I think you guys are completely right about the incentives and the kind of ideal, we should design these things top down with a sense of what we want them to do and how to make it work. I think where that has fallen foul in the past is it's exactly the sort of thing that the senior civil service loves as an exam question. And you say, oh, very good, Minister, very wise. Let's go away. It's time to do our single departmental plan anyway. So we'll just go away and we'll do 6-month HQ review and we'll really just sort of bottom this stuff out for you. And there's a lot of PowerPoint and actually nothing much changes. And you have to really think about the kind of the fundamental incentives that are going on here. We have a civil service today, which is significantly bigger than the one I joined in 2015, over 100,000 people bigger. Many of those jobs are kind of frontline public service jobs. And, the way we define the civil service, which also includes prison officers and border force officers and HMRC tax inspectors, is a bit weird. But loads and loads of those people are also doing exactly the same jobs that you and I did as kind of policy advisors in central government departments. I think the quality of both public services, but also like policy advice, ministers' ability to deal with issues has gotten worse in that time in most areas, some exceptions, and particularly in the AI and tech space where we've built a lot of capacity, which just wasn't there 10 years ago. And it's great that it is. And so sometimes you need to take, I think in civil service reform, some quite top down and quite blunt approaches because the machine is kind of like AI, it has emergent properties to it. And I think there are some people who in the civil service who I think are quite kind of savvy about these things and are really playing their own game. But most of the time it is kind of, we set up these machines, no one's really in charge of how they work, and they just have these emergent properties which we can't really explain. They kind of generate bad outcomes and very risk-averse behavior and worse delivery of the public's priorities without anyone ever really planning them to. And so some of those like big levers we need to pull do include creating a system we can just get rid of people if they're not performing. It's a huge issue in the civil service. We have run a couple of big surveys now of civil servants themselves, which show that like about 7% of civil servants agree with the statement the civil service manages poor performance well. And it's, everyone else is either don't know or in the majority of cases disagrees. It's a huge problem. There are some departments, the Department for Transport and the Treasury where we worked, which over like a 4-year period, removed 0.4% of their staff for poor performance. It's miles, orders of magnitude out of kilter with what high-performing organisations do. You can't tell me for a second that the thousands of people that do those jobs are really high-performing and capable. And you have all these kind of weird incentives to either just pass people around the system or as we are now, as the government are now, rather than actually performance managing people, just offer the whole civil service these very widespread voluntary exit schemes, which are kind of, if you want to leave, we will pay you a month of salary per year of service up until 12 months to leave, no questions asked. And in theory, some questions are asked, but in practice, no. Now, this is like the worst way to manage your workforce because the people who are most likely to leave are your best people who think they can get a job elsewhere and they think, oh, I'd quite like my job search subsidized by the taxpayer. And the people who are most likely to stay are the ones who know that they're not very good, they don't do much work, and if they go anywhere else, they're going to have a tough time, but the civil service will let them coast along. And I think this is, for the public, a really toxic issue, actually. The public aren't daft. They see these stories about civil servants who've got 3 or 4 jobs at the same time working somewhere in Reading, and they think, God, how is that possible? But it's also awful for civil servants, right? Like, why would you show up to do a really good job if you're not going to see really any change in your career trajectory and prospects compared to someone who is just clocking in, not even doing the bare minimum? HR have had them on a performance improvement plan for 1.5 years, 2 years. Like, why would you bother?
And that's your team as well, right?
Yeah,
like, that's who you're meant to be working with.
And they're the ones who end up carrying the cost. So I think some of this stuff in an ideal world, you redesign these systems bottom up, but top down, you just pull some kind of quite big levers to get the incentives right and the behavioural change that we all want to see.
Sorry, yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's where actually we historically the British civil service was when it was started one of the best in the world, because it was meritocratic among a sea of government structures that were based on patronage and on nepotism. And then there was this report, the Northcote. Yeah, it was
Northcote Trevelyan
report, exactly. And then the more meritocratic system came out, and I mean, I kind of just don't believe that the current civil service is very much meritocratic. Like, it's better than many, but if you're not actually firing people who are poor performers, if you're, to be frank, if your salary raises are not just based on performance and based on other factors.
I think the core principle at the heart of it, which applies to all other kind of public service reform, and I think we've forgotten in this country, is that public services are for the public, not for the services, right? Public sector jobs are not an extension of the welfare state. They're not a kind of way of redistributing wealth or giving people comfortable employment. They are to deliver the things the public wants. And I'm all for higher pay in loads of areas of public services, better terms and conditions, better treatment, the way that the buildings we ask some public servants to work in, the quality of respect they get is terrible. The civil service, you still can't get tea and coffee near where you work in most government departments. You've got to go out and buy it. It's a complete joke, right? All for the cost of a few pennies. But that is all a means to an end of really high functioning public services. It doesn't have another end to it. I think we forget that sometimes, and it's a broad principle we should be applying. Yeah,
I come back on your point on merit-based appointments. I just don't think that's what we have anymore at all. I think that we're riding high on that being what we were known for.
There's an interesting bit of history on this, for what it's worth, which I'm going to write about quite soon, which I think is goes to your question of do you need to burn it to the ground or not? How radical do we need to be? Which is we call civil servants, I think this has gone out a bit out of fashion now, but in this country we used to call civil servants mandarins, because the system of kind of standardized examinations and meritocratic recruitment that we put in place in the 1800s was based on the kind of long-running set of sort of civil service exams in Imperial China, which is one of the longest-running institutions in all of history. Right, it's been going for well over 1,000 years and kind of has a modern incarnation under the Communist Party. But actually, if you dig into the history of this, it's so fascinating, because it was never just one set of exams, and every so often you see this pattern keep happening in Chinese history. A new dynasty comes in, and they go, or you get a new emperor, and they say, these exams, they've become kind of corrupt. They're not really meritocratic anymore. They're a bit useless, and we're not getting the quality of people through it. It's meant to be, regardless of your background, but more and more children of prominent civil servants are getting to the top. So we need to completely scrap the system and have a new one. And this cycle kind of repeats and repeats over time. And I think it speaks to what Julia was talking about earlier about institutional entropy. You can't ever really, I think, design these systems perfect once and expect it to stay like that forever. Things always degrade a bit over time. And one of the things that's important about campaigns like LFG is you guys pushing the kind of renewal and revitalization. And I think it's such a core message on other bits of public sector reform too. When we invented the NHS in the 40s, but they said this is a revolutionary moment, right? That was at the heart of the kind of Beveridge report. And the makings of the modern welfare state. And now we're oh, no, that's sacred. You could never touch that or change that. The version they built then in that revolution can't ever be undone. That's true of all our public service institutions. At one point, these things were new, but we act like they're kind of now forever.
Yeah. And that's, I know we're coming up to time, but I really want to focus. So I'll drop the awkward if you were PM. Or PM advisor segment, and if people want to hear what your views are, I'm sure they should follow you on X or LinkedIn and visit your website, because they'll get the details there. And instead, let's spend the last few moments on the topic of AI, because that hooks quite nicely into this point of NHS was built, as the example you use, after the war. It was kind of massive public service, welfare state obviously expanded in that time when we just came out of this huge kind of world-changing context. And now we've got AI. I'm not saying it's the same kind of context, but we do have this transformational piece of technology, and depending on who you believe and your views on different timelines and things, we've got the AI labs actively firing for kind of artificial general intelligence levels. We've got heavy investments by the government, both in terms of infrastructure through the new kind of announcements on US data centers and AI infrastructure being provided, etc. But also a lot of stuff being kind of touted as it's going to solve a bunch of our productivity problems, because we're just like, everyone will have an access to, well, not ChatGPT because we can't, or any other external LLM, we have to build it ourselves or something strange. But, basically they'll have access to chatbots, they'll have access to AI, and that will automate away our problems. Do you guys, there's two parts to this. One, do you think we are preparing for underwhelming results? Like, do you think there's a risk of the fact that AI is going to not achieve this and we're going to be left hanging? And on the flip side, let's say we do get the transformational one. All the stuff you just talked about here doesn't fill me with massive confidence that we're going to have government structures to deal with the ramifications of that. You can take it on either direction you want.
Yeah, so I don't think we're prepared for any version of what AI is going to bring, whether you're thinking it's going to be a godlike creature or like lead to even 1% productivity growth and the kinds of changes in the economy that would lead to that. And I also don't think that we're taking it seriously enough. If we were taking it seriously enough, we would be working really hard to get it built in the UK. But you see, it's literally illegal to train an AI model and a large language model in the UK because of our copyright laws. So even Google DeepMind, people say we have. It's an American lab, but at least they've got offices in the UK. They do not train in the UK because it would be illegal for them to train in the UK. We've got sky-high energy costs, and we're not really thinking about how AI is going to increase our demand for energy and trying to adapt to that. It's in planning. I don't even want to start in planning. They tried to build a home, much less a data center. And then I don't think there's enough intellectual work being done on the social ramifications of AI. So I think that there will be labor shocks. And if we don't figure out a way where people buy into the kinds of positive impacts AI will have on their lives, once they see this labor shock, they're going to be up in arms and on the streets saying we shouldn't be adopting AI. Now, that would be the wrong response. Historically, how fast you adopt a general purpose technology is incredibly predictive of your living standards 20 years on. So there's this really interesting economic paper that I always cite that says how fast you adopt a technology can explain up to 25% of the living standard and GDP divergences between countries 20 years onwards. So diffusion is incredibly important, adoption is incredibly important, but if we don't actually deal with the sort of inevitable backlash that's going to come due to the labor market effects, and also at the same time understand the essay question: how do we get firms and individuals to adopt AI faster? Which is actually an academic question that's not been answered. We don't understand technology diffusion. Even the academic literature is unclear on this. Then we're going to fall behind. And I can talk to you through some of the ideas that we've been developing, the things that I've been thinking about. But ultimately, it can't just be down to think tanks like ours to be answering these questions. And if there isn't an appetite in government and outside of government to be taking these questions and our answers seriously, then we're not going to be, I think, adapting well to what could be one of the biggest shocks that we see in our lifetimes.
I completely agree. I think we're sleepwalking on it. I think there is maybe a little bit less complacency today about the scale of the impact AI will have. than there was before ChatGPT was released in a public beta. Like there's a little tiny bit less because people can use it and people have some sense of the implications, particularly deepfakes and social media ones. And, you know, like people of my parents' generation are able to use it and engage with it on their phones. And so like people are loosely aware, but the institutions are just not prepared at all for what this could involve. And I think like it's so hard kind of making these finely balanced judgments about the future and what it'll involve. But, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, betting on this was a very contrarian belief very few people had. Most people said, oh, you think AI is going to be big? This stuff can't do anything. It's terrible. They thought, you know, it can't beat those recapture, are you a robot thing, so it's never going to amount to much. And a small number of people did really bet on it and bet their careers on it, and they were dead right. They're still right. And those are the people who think it's going to have a huge transformative impact. The rest of the people, I was talking about this earlier, right? Like, I think I remember A-level philosophy on some of this stuff, and there's this God of the gaps theory. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but like the God of the gaps theory of religion is like, you know, as we learned more about the world, we redefined the space for God to be a smaller place. You know, we said, oh, well, why does the sun rise in the morning? Oh, you know, religion has an explanation for that. And then when we learned that the earth orbits the sun, we replaced that. But we say, oh, well, who makes the sun? Oh, God makes the sun. I think there's something about this with AI. Like there are all these people out there who say, wow, that's not really intelligent, is it? You know, if it was really intelligent, it would be able to do X. And then as soon as AI can do that, they go, oh, no, that's not actually real intelligence. That's not general intelligence. General intelligence would be able to do something else. It is blowing through all the benchmarks, and it continues to. The sake of the transformation is just going to be profound. It's going to be profound. And governments, ours and others, are hugely underprepared for this. It's the single kind of biggest blind spot, I think, in what our future could look like.
So pretty quickly, if you could get the government to reverse, to change that attitude, right? Where would you say we're to focus? Like, would it be we need to have our own domestic model because national security reasons, bulldoze through copyright law to do that? Would it be actually you need to get this diffused and you need to get everyone using it and trained up? Or yeah, where would you guys say we have to prioritize, right? You can't do everything. So where would you guys say this effort needs to be?
I'm on team diffusion, right? I think we may well have lost the lead now on frontier model development, and the structural facts about our economy are going to make it very hard for us to be anything other than a sort of downstream adopter of US developed frontier technologies. I think people who worry about the US cutting off our access to some frontier models, God, if we're really in that place with the United States, we've got much bigger problems to worry about, right? And that's a very serious point. I think people underestimate how reliant, we want AI sovereignty. This country's got sovereignty on barely anything about our economy. We're an exporting, trading nation. For me, it's diffusion, and I don't know what it looks like. I think the ideas Julia's talking about are really sensible, but be it in the private sector, in the public sector, we've not worked out how to be a fast follower of technology adoption in this economy, usually because we've been at the frontier of previous technological developments. We've still not really adopted many of the benefits ourselves, but that's the bit we need to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree diffusion's important. I do think that the UK has an opportunity when it comes to open source development. Yes, we probably won't be building the next frontier AI lab, but why would you make that impossible? If you can just make some things legal such that if there's a next technology paradigm, which might happen, right? And we might have an algorithm breakthrough that means that it's not going to all be about scale. We might figure out that, these chips that are designed for computer gaming, actually, we can figure out a better design of chips that's actually made for artificial intelligence that will be much better than parallel processing power. So basically I'm like, yeah, fine. Maybe you think probability is relatively low, but like you should probably hedge and still allow that probability to be to be like within the realm of possibility. I do think we're very reliant on the US, and we historically always have been reliant on the US. I think it is false to sort of, it would be unwise for us to rest on our laurels there. It's not, they have shut things off in the past. So we sent we sent an incredible number of scientists to go build the nuclear bomb. In some ways it was a British-US cooperation, and yet after the bomb was built, our access was cut off, and we had to start over from scratch and build our own bomb. That isn't to say that I don't think we should be collaborating with the US or that I'm hawkish on the US. I'm not, but I do think it's important for us also to think about our own capabilities and be a little bit more clear-eyed about the geopolitical reality that we live in. And I think having a strong sovereign state should still be the aim, while remaining open. That's historically what we've always done, and kind of the strength of Britain has come from its ability to be a trading nation. I completely agree with Joe. I do think diffusion's important, but I wouldn't shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to actually having our own capabilities. And I would think a little bit harder about leverage and the kind of leverage that we're able to command in this new economy. Because right now we pretty much have no leverage, other than the talent. We have incredible talent. But if you look at the rates of people leaving, that's not great either.
Yeah. Oh, no, excellent. Well, thank you. I think that's like a great thing to finish on. And I will give you, I'll plug LFG, a couple of LFG items. So obviously we've got Make or Break, a big event, which I hope you're both coming to. And obviously all your other team members are coming to. Yeah. For those not watching on video, they're nodding in agreement, as should you, listener. So you can meet them in the flesh, and you can press them harder. If you think me or Becca haven't interrogated enough, you can interrogate Joe or Julia in the room on the 23rd of October in the evening. We're at the Indigo at the O2, LFG Make or Break, so make sure you get your tickets for those. But otherwise, I will let you guys have a kind of final statement. If you want to flag anything coming up from your end in terms of publications or things people should look out from either of your organisations, feel free to say now.
Yeah, so we just published our growth survey. Once a year, we survey hundreds of economists and ask them, what does the UK need to do to grow? And we just published that, and it's incredibly interesting. There's actually remarkable consensus. It's a good to-do list for government, in my view. We also just published a paper on AI growth zones, which gives a little bit of technical detail on a lot of the things that we talked about today. And we will be doing lots more of public events. We're going to try to maybe build a little bit more of a community around CBP. So would love to see some of the LFG crew in those events too.
I'm going to plug a specific bit of recent research, which some of my colleagues did on the use of robotics in surgery in the NHS. It's such like an underrated topic, but I've been amazed by what they found. Which is that the use of robotics, these are human operated robotics. Let's forget AI for a second. It has these huge safety and recovery benefits because robotic instruments are much more precise and don't need to they can articulate in ways that a human hand can't. And so it means that on average, people's recovery times from surgery are much quicker than they would be otherwise, because you need to make much smaller incisions and jiggle bits of people's body around less. I thought that was amazing. And this is such an underrated thing. We need robots in every surgery department in this country. So you should go and take a look at that on www.re-state.co.uk/publications. But we've got loads of upcoming work. And if you are a massive civil service reform nerd, as I'm sure many of your listeners are, then we have something coming out very soon on public procurement reform, which is about as techy as it gets, and is going to be very. I don't want to spoil it for you, but maybe we can come back and talk about it at a different time.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys, for coming on. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.